This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
Do you feel a tingling in your loins right now? Do you feel the need to write an op-ed or shoot an Instagram reel or post a defense of Detroit in response to what Donald Trump just said? Or have you actually been to Michigan's biggest city? Do you know children there who grow up unable to read? Do you know people there who feel insecure and unsafe in their own neighborhoods? If you love Detroit, you would admit that it's struggling and that its people, Detroiters, suffer for it. After Trump's remarks last week to a group of suburban businessmen, I wrote a column for The Enjoyer called Don't Detroit My America. Rather than feign offense at what Trump said, as most of my competitors in the Michigan media did, I asked a simple question. It's a question I ask you now. Do you want your community in Michigan to be more like Detroit or less like Detroit? Of Michigan's 10 million souls, about 9.4 million of them live somewhere else than Detroit. Not only did Detroit fall from above 1 million people to well below it, we've actually lost 1 million people since the 1950s. There is no Detroit success story, only the same hole we've been trying to dig out since the riots of 1967. When Mayor Mike Duggan was first elected in 2013, he said he should be judged by whether Detroit grows its population. Back then, Detroit had about 690,000 people. After a decade of Duggan, Detroit has about 620,000 people. And so there is no Mike Duggan success story, not even by the very metric he begged to be judged by. And yet we read today, via Malachi Barrett of Bridge Detroit, that Duggan is looking for a promotion to the big chair. He's exploring a run for the governor's office, which will come open in 2026. Big Gretch has already checked out of the office, and it will get worse in November when Republicans retake the Michigan House. Whitmer was last seen on Instagram with glassy eyes, serving a Dorito as a communion wafer to a woman on her knees. It was unfortunately not as hot as it sounds. Femdom mommy is not really our idea of humor in Michigan, even if it is a TikTok trend. The video was a sign to all of us that Michigan is not Whitmer's target audience anymore. She's not just saying she doesn't need us anymore. She's saying she doesn't want us. She's playing for other audiences now. Evolved, coastal people who don't get all worked up about the Eucharist. Gretchen Whitmer was always a follower. And now she's following a crowd that tells her she's too big for sad little Lansing. When Whitmer's friends got drunk in the high school parking lot, she followed them. Except she was the one who was caught there passed out the next day. Whoopsies. When other governors issued lockdowns for COVID, Whitmer followed them. When her friends met at a bar in Lansing, and she had to break all of her pandemic orders to do it, Whitmer followed. She pushed tables together at the restaurant. She was caught on camera doing so. It was the closest thing to a scandal that she's ever seen. And it was only when Whitmer was caught out by the press that she rescinded the order that never made sense against pushing tables together. So Whitmer is a follower. And what you're going to see over the next 2 years is Whitmer distancing herself from Michigan, its people, and its values. When's the last time she spent a night in Michigan? I think she hung out with some sorority girls the other night, but it seems like every other time you see her, it's on this late night show, on that late night platform. She doesn't really have much interest in the Pleasant Peninsula anymore. With Whitmer, I see in our governor what happens when your wife cuts her hair. Perhaps she joins a travel club or a book club that meets oddly frequently. She's gone, pal. And to the extent that she thinks of you at all, it's with disdain. Let them eat Doritos. Big Gretch is too busy having fun with her new friends to be our governor anymore. And now we see that Mayor Mike Duggan wants to take her place. And now I'm forced to modify my warning. Don't Detroit my Michigan. Even among cities, Detroit's kind of the most suburban of all. I'd probably throw in Los Angeles with that. We don't really live in apartment complexes the way New Yorkers or Chicago or people in Washington do. We still drive from point A to point B. While New York was digging tunnels, Henry Ford was in Dearborn putting the world on wheels. What offends the average Michigander about Detroit is not its geography. It's the mindsets, it's the pathologies driving the people at City Hall which seeps down into the neighborhoods and the people who live there. It's the mindsets that lead to broken families. It's the neglect that leads to bombed out neighborhoods. City Hall's not the only problem in Detroit. Downtown Detroit, I'll admit it, it's a light show. It's safe, it's welcoming for all. There's no denying that. But even if you take the whole 7.2 square miles of greater downtown, in a city that's 140 square miles, that's 95%. That's not downtown. Downtown, as you know it, is a fraction of the city. So when you tell me Detroit's a great place because you ate at a great restaurant there or your favorite sports team plays there, what you're telling me is that you have shallow ties to Detroit. You don't spend any time in the other 95% of Detroit, all in the 7.2, all in the little green zone, all in the part where Dan Gilbert's dumped in billions to give the illusion of safety and a thriving downtown. So we just talked about it. The people who talk about sports teams first typically have the most shallow ties to Detroit. Here's what Duggan said in responding to Trump. Tell me if anything jumps out. Duggan tweeted, Detroit just hosted the largest NFL draft in history. The Tigers are back in the playoffs. The Lions are headed to the Super Bowl. That's fake news. Crime is down and our population is growing. Lots of cities should be like Detroit, and we did it all without Trump's help. Duggan's defense of Detroit reads like exactly what it is, a Livonia man's view of the world. If you love Detroit, you would ask more for Detroiters. You would worry for their children who travel dangerous streets to attend bad schools. You would worry for its people who get robbed at bus stops and dollar stores by people who don't have the education to think things through. You would disdain the 60 years of Democrats who've steered the city into the ground. By now, Detroit has benefited from billions in dollars in federal aid for everything from homelessness to crime to education, economic development, revitalization. And Detroit's still busted in all of those ways. Detroit has a grievance industrial complex with activists who work in all of those areas and touch all those dollars. And those activists would tell you a very different story than Detroit's suburban white cheerleaders. It's been said before that hit dogs holler. It wasn't just Duggan who responded to Trump. Pretty much every white Democrat in Michigan rose as one with impassioned defenses of the city. And as Shakespeare might say, the Democrats doth protest too much. This weekend, Donald Trump spoke in Coachella, California, site of the big music festival. During the speech, he warned, if Kamala wins, the entire country will become like the migrant camps in LA and San Francisco. To their credit, neither the journalists in LA or San Francisco took the bait. Their town fathers and chambers of commerce did not rise in defense of the city. Influencers did not dance. Both cities are struggling in reality and in public perception, but both still have too much confidence in themselves to holler when they're hit by a stray. Detroit has no confidence. Detroit's comeback story is like an egg race. One wrong move and everything goes splat. This is why Duggan closed the Riverside Parks during the 4th of July fireworks at Belle Isle. He knows Detroit is still too violent and his police department is still too thin to cover for both citizens and VIPs. So the VIPs were protected and the citizens were told they could watch the fireworks at home. A week later, Duggan was vindicated. 21 people were shot at once in Detroit. 2 of them died. By sheer numbers, this should have been huge news and might even wreck the comeback story. But the very next day, Duggan managed to flip the narrative somehow. Duggan told the media that block parties were the problem. We had 21 people shot, 2 of them die, and the Detroit media prints it the very next day faithfully as if they were his press office that block parties are the problem because the mayor said so. All Detroit needed, Duggan said, was common sense block party reform. And the sheep bleated in unison after him. The influence of Black Lives Matter is why black and brown appear in capital B's in your newspaper. But nobody actually believes it that Black Lives Matter. If they did, they would act differently. In 1989, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry spoke to the National Press Club. D.C., like Detroit now, had high homicide rates. Its victims were mostly black men. No need to worry, Barry told the press, a room full of white reporters. Outside of murders, D.C. is safe. What he was saying is, if you're a reporter, or if you're a congressman or a member of a staff or a member of the White House staff, you'll probably travel in the circles where DC's violence wouldn't affect you. And they'd say the same thing in Detroit now. Outside of all the dead black men, Detroit is safe too. But this regular willingness to yada yada our way past these deaths defeats the very premise. Black lives don't matter to Detroit's biggest fans. They can't. If they did, these people would put down their pom-poms and teach a kid how to read. 95% of 8th graders in Detroit can't read at grade level. That means that when the Lions kick the Dallas Cowboys' ass, you better have watched the game because you probably can't read the recap. This is grotesque. This robbed kids of everything that matters before they even know that anything's been taken. You want to be offended? You want to cry about something? Cry about that. Cry about stolen futures. Tiffany Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, joined this podcast to talk about the importance of childhood literacy. Tiffany was a school board member in Florida when she identified the children left behind. There were a lot of black kids in her district who just could not read. But when she went to local black leaders, she didn't find fellow travelers in that cause. When Pink Floyd said, "Don't be afraid to care," they were actually talking about what happened next to Tiffany. For daring to care, Tiffany Justice was smeared as a racist. By upsetting the narrative of growth and progress that the black leaders were pushing, because it wasn't their job to actually care about their kids, and they did not care. They wanted to be the official custodian where all the money and all the influence came into, and so they needed to promote a narrative that things were improving. So to talk about the kids left behind obviously flies in the face of that. So what'd they do? They left the kids where they were. John 15 talks about the true vine. In just 2 verses, it tells a truth that we've long forgotten, that love is correction and correction is a form of love. You're absolutely not fine the way you are. I'm not. You're not. None of us is. And so the true vine story talks about how basically God will take the things from the vine that don't need to be there, and the things that are fruitful, he'll multiply them so they grow even more, which is to say you're not fine the way you are, which is to say there's some form of correction or change or adaptation that we all need to go through to become our best selves. We are not born just out of the box with everything we need. We have to grow. And so what's being denied to kids in Detroit are those opportunities to grow. You don't want your community to be more like Detroit. There's a reason you didn't move your family to Detroit. Your community becoming more like Detroit means it would be less safe, more corrupt, more dangerous, less responsive, bad schools, bad roads, and bad politicians with bad attitudes. You think Detroit, the city that ran off 1 million people, is beyond criticism? It's not. If you want to help Detroit, don't write an op-ed. Don't be satisfied with an angry tweet. Grab a golden book. Help an 8th grader learn to read today. My guest today on Burying the Lead needs no introduction. Anna Hoffman is our first multi-time guest on the Enjoyer podcast, and we're so happy to welcome her back. Anna, thank you for taking the time today.
Glad to be here. Glad to be outside.
So, Anna, over the weekend, I saw a headline that disturbed me, as is often the case when I read the Detroit news. And the headline, the tweet said, "Abortion has passed inflation as the top election issue for women under 30, survey finds." And so I see something and I say something. I write on Twitter. You guys should be following me down I-75, by the way. I write, "Molech has one hell of a PR team. And if you don't get that reference, get in your good book, please. When it's too late, these women will realize that they were whipped into this abortion frenzy by women in their 50s. That this was done to them, not for them. That political abortion is vote harvesting in aid of a black genocide." My part was true. What was not true, as I learned as you look deeper into it, was the Detroit News headline. And so, Anna, you and I love to talk about the thing behind the thing. And you gave me a powerful reminder. Yeah, I studied history in college. You gave me a powerful reminder that the thing behind the thing is the primary document itself. And so rather than to take Detroit News' word for it and assume the basic truth of its claims, Anna looked at the survey itself. And so if the announced results were disappointing, and proof of kind of the uphill nature of our battle, the truth itself is actually shocking. So Anna looked into it. Anna got into the primary documents, and then she wrote, "We cannot beat this without being better media critics. Never rely on the headline. They don't include the poll because it's not a top issue among all women surveyed. Only 88 women under the age of 30 were surveyed." Now, nobody would think that a 150-year-old newspaper, which is selling subscriptions for 10 cents a month, would have credibility to burn by selling and telling fake news. But that's exactly what's happened here. They've trained their readership to not look for primary documents, not expect them, and not click into them when they are provided. And this kind of thing, this truth that Anna has unearthed, this kind of thing is why the Freep shut off its comment section. It doesn't want an eagle eye like a Matt Wilk or an Anna Hoffman pointing out that the premises of its stories are false. Every night on Twitter, Detroit news reporters fight with their subscribers rather than find it within their hearts to deliver the true and timely stories those readers demand. Abraham Lincoln warned of this day. He said, "You can't fool all the people all the time." Anna, thank you for coming back to the Enjoyer podcast. We'll start you with this one. What made you look beyond the headline? Is that a routine practice, or did something feel off in this case?
Well, unfortunately, throughout the last couple of years in looking into our local news, especially the Detroit news, there have been some patterns that have emerged. The idea of push polling is not a new concept to them. It typically is a push poll. Last time we talked, it was about their infamous immigration poll. You broke that down. So, there's that obvious, what are they really trying to do here, which is craft a narrative. And so my immediate thought was, well, who did they poll? So as I typically do, I opened the article, to read what they were saying. And then I kind of do a first skim through to see if they even include the actual poll in their article, which this time, it was kind of hard to find, but I did get to it. And it didn't take me more than 3 or 4 pages to find, the way the question was asked and then who they actually polled, which was 88 women under the age of 30. The other, I think it was, don't quote me because it's not right in front of me right now, but I think it was around 600 total.
Right.
So
like
they have a very
624, something like that.
Yeah, very small sample size that they're creating this headline on. But the really interesting thing is that if you look at all the women across that they polled total, the 600 and whatever it was, this is like the fourth most important issue to them. And they didn't even give them more than 4, maybe 6 choices. So it's very misleading to generate that sort of headline based on what they actually asked, and more importantly, who they asked it to in this case.
It's just like saying that the vaccine is safe and effective, and it turns out that everything you're basing that on is based on 30 people.
Right.
Like, we are denied the basic opportunity for truth, because if we knew the real numbers, we would never accept these sweeping conclusions. Mm-hmm. How could someone do what you did? How did you go about doing it?
So sometimes it's a little harder than it was this particular time because they typically will use the same pollster. I noticed pretty quickly this was a new pollster. I didn't look too far into it, but it's some sort of public health funded group. So we can imagine there may possibly be a slant to begin with the demographic that they are reaching. But in this case, they did have a link to, I believe it was another article in their story. But then I had to go through that article to another link to the company's website to find the actual poll and then take it from there. So the question we need to be asking going forward every time they put out one of these polls is, one, is it linked? And if it's not, let's find it. They usually at least give you a name of who conducted the poll so that you could look for it on your own.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't have to do that. It should just be in the article.
Well, I find that fascinating. That's like 4 steps that the average person might not know to take. And I feel that the media at this point is banking on you not taking those steps. This is why they don't mention, the actual House bills and the Senate bill numbers.
Mhm.
You should be linking to those. And why they so which is to say, when this story was presented, they didn't link where you could find the document yourself easily, readily.
Correct. They didn't. They made it challenging. And it's interesting you bring this up because in all of the discussions we had over the weekend with this particular media outlet and some other glaring mistakes that have been made, another media member, not a part of this outlet, reached out to me and made a comment like, readers don't have the time to analyze the information. That's why you need the media. We are skilled at analyzing these reports, and most people simply don't have the time to do it. So he presented it as some sort of gift that they're giving us. Like, we're not capable of finding this information, reading it for ourselves, and coming to our own conclusion. So essentially, it was an admission that, yeah, we know you're not going to read beyond the headline. That's why we do this for you.
And it's the gatekeeper thesis.
Mm-hmm.
That is the public service you do, is that because you've, furnished a report of a committee meeting or a report on a report or whatever news story you've presented us today, that its existence is a public service, that you have served us by doing this. And there's, I like Detroit documenters because when they go to a meeting, they'll print the agenda of the thing they're looking at. Like they're pressing for primary documents constantly. But this gatekeeper thesis, which is, we're going to tell you that a bill is called Don't Say Gay. We're not going to link the bill, which doesn't mention the word, doesn't say you can't say it, doesn't have anything to connect to the headline. And when we're pressed and tested, and when people do tell the public that, hey, this has nothing to do with B, we're going to call it the so-called Don't Say Gay.
Mm-hmm.
And this detachment from the primary document is their superpower because it gives them the power to write narrative and to create impressions.
Correct. And then unfortunately, that wasn't the only story put out over the weekend that illustrates this. There was another story that did not get nearly as much traction from a different writer at that outlet, who published a very long narrative of a local sheriff and what he had allegedly said about hosting a campaign event. I can't remember the exact words. I'm trying to remember exactly what his story was, but it was about the incident.
Mike Murphy in Livingston County,
yes.
talking about the Trump rally in Howell.
Correct. So he lays out this whole story about Mike Murphy saying, I think, "What the hell," or some quote from Mike Murphy. And it's relying on FOIA requests. Guess what we never saw in that article? The FOIA request. We never saw the emails. We never saw the context that it was presented in. We never saw what was asked for. We just saw, I read these documents and this is what it says. And so I think it's second nature to them now. They think that we need them to find this information and that they're translating it. That's just not supposed to be the way that it works.
No, you're supposed to go beyond and tell us the meaning of it and what motivates the people involved and the thing behind the thing. Like, the reason we're having to do this at home, we all have other stuff to do and we could be talking about. But when this basic societal function, see, my problem is they want the credibility of saying we're these public servants because we do journalism. But then when you read their work, it is self-service, not public service.
I don't know that I would say it's self-service. I think at this point it does border on propaganda. It's, who is paying them to put out these narratives? Because that's what it does. It's like they have a talking point they want to prove. And so then the whole story is built around whatever that talking point is. That's usually very one-sided and very partisan. And when you press them on, well, how do you know this? Or where did you get the information? Or where can I learn more? It's, we know, we're telling you, you're supposed to just take our word for it because we're journalists. And that's not how it works.
When Chad Livengood, the political editor at the News, said to me last week that we were talking about the Alyssa Slotkin and the NDAs and all that, and did she, didn't she? What's the distinction between Slotkin and Team Slotkin? There is none. And when his defense was, well, if we are to trust Alyssa Slotkin, if we were to take her word for it, then she couldn't have been privy to what a junior staffer learned using her authority. Okay, good. And people are saying this stuff out loud, and they're not embarrassed to be saying it. They're not embarrassed to be offering defenses of politicians putting walls between themselves and the public that they're supposed to be serving. They're comfortable arguing fine details with us as if we don't know the details. And when that guy had to admit that the Slotkin staffer signed the NDA on the Goshen project, the very claim they were trying to dispute, what are you guys doing anymore? I don't think people get it, Anna. I think people think we're being mean. I don't have anything against these people. I'm cheering for you. I'm your biggest fan. But when I show up to the games, I want to watch a good game.
Absolutely. And I want them to win as well because they have a huge reach. There was a tag, I think maybe you made the list a few weeks ago, of Michigan reporters to watch and accounts to follow.
I don't think I made the list. No.
That's really disappointing. But, they were at the top of the list. They have a massive reach. They have a good reputation. Why ruin that? Why can't we all work together and, just give the public some honesty? People are smart enough to make their own decisions, but you have to give them all the information. You don't tell them what to think. And it's really ironic also to hear Chad say that if we are to take Alyssa Slotkin at her word, because that's essentially what he's asking us to do for him.
For him.
Right? And
because I've turned my brain off to take a politician at their word, and when you say with that premise out loud, that Slotkin's junior staffer signed an NDA that meant that junior staffer couldn't tell Slotkin, are you kidding me? Like, for any journalist to actually say that out loud and promote that as a story, I was embarrassed to have that promoted to me, because at some point you're making me look bad. At some point, this is a place I worked for 10 years, and for people to promote these ideas that they haven't thought through on my timeline is damn near a sign of disrespect. It's like they don't think they even need to furnish a good story for us anymore.
It's, again, the only explanation is that they have to advance a narrative, that their livelihood depends on presenting a talking point or providing cover for someone. Because I know, in following them over the years, it didn't used to be this way. They were a very balanced outlet.
Just a few years ago.
Something has changed. And I truly think that they've either, been, I'm not sure. They must be accepting public money or from somebody, because it just doesn't make sense how far they've gone. And the Slotkin story is even more interesting, because where all of this started was that she stood there on the debate stage and cited the Detroit News as proof that she hadn't signed an NDA.
Absolutely.
And that really stuck out to me. Why are you saying the media says I didn't do this?
Right.
So I must not have done it.
Right. She called in her backup. She called in her backup. So you thought that was strange.
Yeah. That's not how it works. The media is supposed to be telling the truth. And the politician who's at the center of this scandal should not have to use them as justification for her actions or lack of actions.
Yeah, I mean, so Chad says trust Slotkin, then Chad says trust me, then Slotkin says trust Chad.
Slotkin started it with,
like, what is the problem here? Right.
It's almost like, yay, they printed my story and cleared my name, so that's proof.
And I used to have
wouldn't
this.
Have even picked up on it if she hadn't said that. I probably wouldn't have even chased the story to begin with.
See, that's fascinating to me, because I had this idea called basically idea laundering that you can do with a newspaper. So you get an op-ed placed, or even better if you get it placed in what looks to the average person to be a news story, now that idea is out there and it has that legitimacy of the 150-year-old press. And so to the average person, I think about what Stringer Bell said in The Wire. Whatever we call heroin is going to get sold. They're sitting up there in Fort Street, doggone near homeless. In just a few months, they'll be homeless, still thinking that whatever they call news is going to get bought. And what I find stunning, Anna, is like, what would it take to reach them at this point? Being evicted doesn't do it. Selling subscriptions for 10 cents a month doesn't do it. Getting bodied by random people on Twitter on the nightly doesn't do it. What would it do to bring the pride back to the Detroit media?
I don't know, because we don't truly know what their motivation is or why they have shifted so far. It could, everybody has a price. I don't know how else to put it. So we don't know why they are suddenly so motivated to be putting out all of these narratives and talking points. And so it's very hard to know how you can beat their offer, whatever, when you don't know what they're being offered.
Absolutely fascinating. We'll get you out of here on this one. This weekend, we had a tale of two offenses. We had the Democrats basically every white Democrat in Michigan try to gin up a controversy and make it seem like Donald Trump was being a big meanie about Detroit. And then we saw our governor actually piss off our Catholic community in Michigan, which is large and is more vocal than I'm sure she thought, with her Dorito communion. Which one is realer, and which one might actually impact things November 5th?
Oh, absolutely. Her blatant disrespect and blasphemy of the Catholic faith. I mean, that is 1.8 million Catholic voters in Michigan. And then to top it off, she didn't even really issue an apology. No. It was an "I'm sorry you feel that way."
The Panera Bread apology.
Yeah, it's almost like the apology was worse than what she originally did. And the backlash is still continuing. People are still out there just calling for her resignation, which, I mean, we know that's not going to happen, asking for another apology. There was a small rally in front of the governor's mansion this weekend where they were praying the rosary. I know the Catholic bishops have asked Catholics to pray for her, which is the appropriate response. Very good, peaceful Christian response. But Catholics vote, and there were a lot of them, I think, that were considering voting Democrat, and this may just move them over.
What do you see driving this? Because I see this as, this is like your wife getting, a short haircut and joining a travel club. She gone, bruh. Like, I look at this and I see Whitmer having no interest and no need to pander to Michigan anymore. Femdom mommy is kind of not really Michigan humor. And then today with the Indigenous Peoples Day, the fake Columbus Day. I mean, she is making her disdain so clear. But also what I see with Whitmer is she's a bad teammate. I think back to 2014, she doesn't join the Democrat ticket as lieutenant governor because she knows they're going to lose. 2024, she doesn't join Harris on the ticket because she knows Harris is going to lose. And now in the last month of the most important election of our lives, I mean, Barack Obama is out there talking to groups of a dozen black guys at a time and catching hell for it for days and days and days. Obama's talking to the dozens. He's talking to less people than Jesus had in his ministry. And now we have Whitmer freelancing and doing Dorito communion. Can we say the quiet part out loud that our governor is not cheering for Kamala Harris?
You're absolutely correct. I put a poll out about this on my timeline this weekend, and I haven't checked the results yet. It might not quite be up. But the question was whether or not she's trying to sabotage the campaign so that she can run in 2028. I wouldn't put it past her. I really wouldn't. She also has a serious case of a feminized Peter Pan syndrome. I don't know how else to explain it. She, over the weekend also hung out at a sorority. The woman is...
Yes.
It's gross.
There's some arrested development.
It's very bizarre. It's almost like she's having a midlife crisis.
I was
It's
just gonna. Is our governor having a midlife crisis?
a little late for that. So she could be building some sort of abortion influencer brand to launch after the election. I don't know. It's gross. It's super weird. It's offensive. Um, she's just not a serious person. And can we also talk about how she's never in her state anymore? She's, all over the country campaigning for more abortions and,
Mm-hmm. She's in Davos. She's in East Coast, West Coast.
Taiwan. Why do we need an office in Taiwan?
Never at home. Never on the home front.
Yeah.
Never with her family at home.
Yeah, she may just be going through a really, really bad midlife crisis or, the change. I don't know what's going on with her, but
she's certainly not interested. She doesn't want to be
Mm-hmm.
our governor anymore.
Oh, no, not at all. She's moved on.
She thinks Lansing is boring. She thinks Michigan is boring. She doesn't want to be around people who get offended by Eucharist jokes. Like her new friends are so much more evolved and fascinating than we are. I just wish she'd do the honorable thing and just go on ahead and go off into that sunset.
Well, we've got about 18 months left, but I guess my question would be, who are her friends? I mean, the woman is knocking doors on a sorority in East Lansing on a Saturday night. Can you imagine if you're some 20-something-year-old sorority girl and Governor Whitmer knocks on your door wanting to hang out for the night? Hey, kids.
It's sad.
So
it's
weird.
Honestly sad.
It really is. She needs to age gracefully. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Anna, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. I know I know you got the kids around today, but thank you. Thank you for your voice.
Thanks for having me.
Is so powerful and so strong. And you cut through. Like, I mean, it's honestly, it's like it is having a fellow traveler. It is such a blessing to be able to nerd out and kind of just, to see what's undergirding all this stuff, because I see people making our arguments.
Yeah, I do too. And it's really incredible all that we've been able to do over such a short amount of time. And I'm really looking forward to whatever's next. I have the best mentors.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Be well, Anna. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.